Good afternoon. I'm Jim Woolliscroft, and I want to welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. As you see on this slide, what we're going to be talking about is something that many students and student athletes in particular have a lot of interest in and a lot of questions about, and that is the gap year. That year after you graduate from undergraduate and consider whether to go straight into applying for medical school or to engage in some other activities, i.e. the gap year. May I have the next slide, Julie? Today, we are very fortunate to have two special guests who have joined us from their respective places around the country as we are all sheltering in place. Alex and Zach, both are alums from the University of Michigan. As you see here, Alex was an athlete on the soccer team. He graduated initially in 2015 and then finished a master's degree in 2019. Has had many activities in the gap time period, working for Epic, doing research, and obviously completing his master's degree. We are very pleased that he is going to be joining us at the University of Michigan Medical School this fall as a member of the class of 2024. We're also very pleased to have Zach with us. As you see, he is an alum from the University of Michigan in 2016. He was a member of the Michigan track and field team, was very active during his time here, and then very productive in research during GAP activities. Currently, he has just completed his M1 year at the Medical College of Wisconsin and is an upcoming M2 in just a few weeks. So we are very pleased that these two student athletes who have really taken great advantage of gap year opportunities have joined us this afternoon. As always, also very pleased that we have Dr. Wasko with us. Dr. Wasko has tremendous experience in counseling student athletes and others on all aspects of applying to medical school, and will be really sharing some of his wisdom with us now on the gap year. So let me turn it over to Dr. Wasko.
Oh, thanks very much, Jim. And welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you're going to share with us some of your experiences. And those of you who are joining us online, we're also grateful to have you here. Before we begin, maybe I'd like to hear from Alex and also from Zach a little bit in their own words what their gap experience was like. So why don't we start with you, Alex?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Wasko. So I think a really important, I guess, idea that I had to confirm before I took my gap year was you want to really determine whether, medicine is right for you. I think there's a lot of decisions that go into that and a lot of exploration. And for me, in 2015, I did not know that for a fact. I was interested in medicine, but not certain. And I think my rationale I started working at Epic in 2015 to 2017 was, can I continue a career where I can work, gain responsibility, stay involved in healthcare, but at the same time, continue to explore the idea of going into medicine? And I'll talk a little bit about why I think that's really important later. But so I basically worked at Epic for 2 years. I then applied and did not get in, did some research and worked for another healthcare consulting company, did a little bit of analysis of my own application, and realized that I needed to improve my academic credentials, which led to my master's degree that I got in 2019. And then I applied again this year and was lucky enough to, eventually matriculate this fall. So it's a little bit of my experience.
Well, thanks very much, Alex. I think that's a very enlightening story, and it's typical of a lot of people who are applying to medical school. on this screen, we can see just some basic information before we go on to Zach, that the average age of matriculants in medical school now is over 24 years. In fact, 24 years and 6 months. So gap years are pretty common. I think at the University of Michigan Medical School, I heard that of the matriculating class, only 20 to 25%, if I'm right, have come in right from undergraduate school and into medical school. The rest have all had gap year experiences. So for those of you who are considering it, the important thing is that not everyone has a set plan. What do you actually want to do? And you determine that by how you feel a gap year will help your personal growth, as Alex has just talked about. And the thing to keep in mind is that gap years aren't just time off, but they're time to do things which will help support your application, help deepen your dive into the medical field, and help you get a broader perspective on healthcare in general. So transformational gap activities can make or break your applications. It can make it much stronger, but if you do something frivolous, it might actually break it. So time now to hear from Zach. We have worked with Zach for many years in a row, and he's got another concept to share with us about his own gap year experiences. So Zach, what about you?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Wasco. But yeah, I would say overall, the gap year experience for myself was very positive. And I think that it's a great opportunity to follow your passion. I think that's a very important thing, and that'll reflect in your interviews. And personally, I conducted basic science research. I worked in the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Michigan. And I also worked in the Department of Pediatric Neuro-Oncology. And it was projects that I was very passionate about. It was a great opportunity to stay connected to the athletic department at the University of Michigan because of the Chad's Health Initiative. And in hindsight, I think it was an invaluable experience because conducting hypothesis-driven basic science research, it allows you to develop a deeper fund of knowledge within the basic sciences that is super helpful once you get to medical school, especially during that first year due to the nature of the coursework. And additionally, yeah, I mean, that was kind of the big takeaway for me, but also I did take some graduate coursework while I wasn't in a formal master's program like Alex. I did audit some courses and took those classes. And I think that's really was helpful, like getting that solid foundation in physiology. It's super helpful to have a strong grasp of one of the basic sciences before you start medical school. So you can just feel that much more confident and comfortable once you get there. And also, I think it's important to not think of gap years as a detour on your way to becoming a physician, but a really big part of your development and ultimate story of becoming a physician. And I think when I had that perspective, and in hindsight looking now, it was just so helpful to kind of have peace of mind and then be successful throughout the process, and then ultimately once in medical school.
Thanks, Zach, very much. A different perspective for sure than Alex, but one that is equally important and will be valued, I think, by the people who are listening to us. So let's just take a look now at some of the pros and the cons of taking gap years. And this is something to think about, if you're actually considering it. So what are some of the pros, first of all? Well, for some people, it's maybe more time to study for the MCAT exam. As you've probably heard, and those of you who've taken it know for sure, the MCAT exam is considered to be the most difficult standardized exam that's been written. And it's also long and involved, and it's online, so you have to have a plan for how to study for it and a plan for how to take it. Many times people will say, well, I'm a good student, I've got a 3.6 or a 3.8 average and a robust major, so I think I'm going to do okay. But this is different than any class you've taken before and different than any exam you've taken before. And people who have just blissfully walked into the MCAT exam thinking that they're going to ace it because they're used to acing exams have been struck at how difficult it is, and they don't get anywhere near the score that is consistent with their academic ability. And so you need to take time to study for the MCAT. Maybe take a prep course, do independent study. There's several ways to go about it. But it's very hard to do that for student athletes when you consider that the intense curriculum that you have for your academic activities and the extensive amount of time that's involved in your athletic program now for many people on a year-round basis. So many people feel that, you know, when their academic and athletic career is over, that's the time for them to study and then take the MCAT exam. So they devote that gap year to preparation and taking the MCAT. Another reason for considering a gap year is to build up your resume of supplemental activities. As you're aware, it's, of course, the basis of people getting into medical school is good grades and a good proficiency examination like MCAT and good results. But you need to also show us that you've had experiences in things which will help you get a more broad perspective on medicine. And that comes from supplemental activities like research, which Zach has just talked about. And we'll maybe ask him a little bit later to talk about that more in depth, and Alex as well. But also volunteerism, your opportunity to give back in ways that, that you can help other people. Volunteerism is part and parcel of a medical career. We have had many experiences as we're training and as we're treating patients, and we have a good perspective on things that are needed in the healthcare field. So to give back in time and funds for some people is really important to do. And so to get that background in volunteerism sets the stage for what your career is going to be like. And then clinical experiences. The more opportunities you have to be around patients and see the doctor-patient encounter, not just observing in the corner, but actually being able to interact with patients. And you can do that through research activities, particularly if they involve translational research, or in volunteer experiences, or in shadowing. So the more clinical experiences you have, the better you understand of what your role is going to be like as a physician. Then there are post-baccalaureate programs. Now, some people come to the idea of going to medical school rather slowly. It's not a flash in the pan that suddenly they say, I want to be a doctor. But maybe they were interested in undergraduate school in an unrelated field. Maybe it was finance, maybe it was anthropology, maybe it was languages or whatever. But then when they graduate and get out in the field, they find that their experience in the work profession that they're in is not consistent with what their concept of themselves is. And so now they begin to consider, maybe I should change careers. And maybe they had some good experiences volunteering in a healthcare setting when they were in school, or they've talked to other people about the value of healthcare as a profession. And so now they're thinking of going back. So they take post-baccalaureate programs, which essentially duplicate the hard sciences that are prerequisites for most medical schools. And then relevant work experiences. Those are also very valuable. You can be a research assistant, as Zach has talked about, and actually done independent research as well. Many people try to get clinical contact by doing an EMT or a paramedic program. The paramedic programs are quite a bit longer than the EMT programs, but the basis is that you work on an ambulance or in a stadium setting and you respond to emergency calls. So you have clear contact as a first responder and can get clinical experience that way. An increasingly popular relevant work experience is scribing. Doctors today can't depend on their handwriting for people to read what goes on. So everything has to be entered into the computer. But for those people who aren't adept at entering into the computer, it helps to have a scribe, someone who can listen to what's going on, can enter the information so that the doctor-patient visit can be much more efficient from both the doctor's point of view and the patient's point of view. As a prospective medical student, scribing helps you to see the medical encounter from all sides. How do certain doctors react with patients? How do others dig out the details of their history and physical. How do they make patients more comfortable? And then, of course, there are experiences like AmeriCorps, which will work in community settings, maybe as a teacher or some other help method. So Julie, let's go to the next slide. Some other issues to think about as pros of taking a gap year is maybe to earn a little money. Medical school has become an expensive proposition. In-state students who go to medical school, the average tuition is $35,000. Maybe up a little, maybe down a little from that, but that's sort of the average. Out-of-state students and with some private schools, the medical school can be $60,000 or more per year. All of that adds up to a graduating medical student debt, which nears or exceeds, in some cases, $200,000. So if you take a gap year and can make some money, save some money, it'll allow you to cut into that debt a little bit, or at least have some money put aside so that you can lead a more normal life as a medical student. Another good pro of taking a gap year is to prevent a burnout. Your academic year has been hard. It's been long. For some of the student athletes, it's 5 years long, and it's intense with the academic and the athletic demands on their time. So they don't have a lot of extra time. A gap year or two will allow you to take a break from all that and gain life perspectives by pursuing other passions that you've had in mind. Maybe travel. Maybe you wanted to backpack through Europe for 6 or 7 weeks, or maybe you trained in music years ago and you want to rekindle that interest, or in art, or pursue hobbies, or learn another language. And that's what I'd like to focus on a little bit, because we see an increasing percentage of our population is Hispanic, is Spanish speaking. One of the statistics I saw this past month is that 60% of the births in the United States are in Spanish speaking families. And so that means that as a physician, you're going to run into the issue of language barriers much more often and more likely with Hispanic populations. So why not take that time to learn and become proficient with a language? And then the last three there, more time to consider career choices, pursue competitive athletic experiences, learn and feel more comfortable with independence. So let's go to the maybe the cons. And you'll notice here that this is the only slide on cons. So there are many more pros to take a gap year than there are cons to take a gap year. And that may be my bias, but I think it's actually true. And we'll hear from the students more about that from Zach and Alex. The cons we hear, I don't want to lose time. I set out to go to medical school. I want to go right after undergraduate school. I don't want to lose focus. Plus, all my friends are going right into medical school, and I don't want to be behind them. I want to stay with them the whole way. Another con of taking a gap year is maybe a strategic resume damage, I call it, and that's pursuit of activities that are non-relevant. So instead of research, you may want to take and become a bartender in Aruba or something. Well, that's probably not a relevant activity unless maybe you were behind the bar and doing a psychological study on the people who come down to Aruba. You can craft anything, I suppose, into be relevant, but you know what I'm trying to say here. Or if you take the time off, but you fail to improve the proficiencies that you set out to need for medical school. And so if there's no proficiency improvement and you didn't pursue relevant activities, then your resume for medical school is going to be damaged for sure. Because I'll guarantee you, when you write your application, the reviewers are going to look and say, what's going on here? What is this person doing during their gap? And it almost doesn't matter exactly what you do as much as you defend what you do in terms of helping your perspective, your maturity, to make yourself more translational and make yourself a better person for medicine. And then risk of losing academic focus. Maybe if I take some time off, I'm going to like having that time off, and I'm not going to want to consider going back to medical school. And so, that may be legitimate for some people. Maybe they need to have a more steady state. And then lastly, if you're starting off to make some money to cut into your medical school debt, but you wind up spending more than you save, then, your problem is going to be worsened. So, that's my take on the pros and the cons. Dr. Williscroft, anything you have to say about all of this?
So I think you did a great job of covering it. Going back to some of the comments that Alex and Zach made, the whole purpose of expanding your competencies, your proficiencies, really pursuing something that you're passionate about is very important. It's much more important to do that than to try to do something that you think will look good on your application and not really do it in wholeheartedly simply because you're trying to check a box. So really be strategic about it, but do something that you can engage in wholeheartedly. And I think our student input here is really important, and the different paths they took. Alex's path is different than Zach's, but clearly it was, in both cases, goal-oriented. They were going and got ever more certain of the goals that they were pursuing, which was very important in their successful eventual application to medical school.
As an involved observer of both Zach and Alex, you know, over a longitudinal period of time, over 5 or 6 years that I've known both of these young men, I can say that I did see a great difference in their motivation, in their goal orientation, in their commitment, and in their focus. And it wasn't just an instant thing, it was subtle, but it happened over time. So with all of this in mind and all the things that Dr. Williscroft has talked about and I've talked about, maybe we'll turn it back to you guys and say, and hear from you now some perspectives that you have relative to all of this. So we started with Alex before, maybe we'll start with Zach this time.
Yeah, I'm happy to reflect or answer any specific questions. Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Williscroft makes a very good point. Following your passion is super important because that's will lead to like the best outcome in whatever it is you do. And I do think quality's more important than quantity. So don't try to check all these boxes, but rather just ask yourself, would I be doing this if I wasn't applying to med school? And if you can say yes, you're probably going down the right path. And also, you know, after, you know, being a student athlete for 4 or 5 years, I really enjoyed those years of being, you know, just working and spending time in Ann Arbor. I really feel like it was a fun time in my life. So I think that's a positive thing as well. And also, I guess, speaking specifically to Michigan, it's such an amazing place where, you know, if you take the initiative and reach out to faculty, they are so willing to take you on as a mentee, to have you work in their lab. And I'm happy to, you know, reflect on that a little bit too, because I know sometimes that's what's daunting about this gap year process is how do you find these opportunities? How do you create these opportunities? Because it's not always the most clear path.
Thanks, Zach. And how about you, Alex?
Yeah, so I'll touch on my own experience a little bit because I thought of, at least for me, I had two very clear what I call like phases of my gap year experience. And I think they're both equally important. So phase one, I touched on it earlier, is this exploratory phase. You probably know this from doing your own research, but medicine is entirely, you have to devote so many resources to getting in and time and energy. And once you're there, it's really hard to, you know, potentially get off the track per se. You know, you're going to medical school for 4 years, you're then going to residency, and, you know, there's a huge level of time, money, and resources that you're putting into doing so. So I feel like for me, my first 2 years of gap year per se was all about figuring out, was the career of medicine for me? What I mean by that is it's easy to say, oh, I want to help people, or I like science, or, doctors are cool, or, you know, they have a lot of respect, or they make a lot of money. Those things are pretty easy to jump to. But you kind of want to figure out on a day-to-day basis what your career will look like. You know, is a family important to you? Do you value, you know, monetary, I guess, like stability early on in life? Do you have the resources and, you know, maybe the commitment to actually stay all 8 years? So I feel like my first years was figuring that out. And I think the key to that is spending time in the healthcare field. So I was working at Epic, but I was also at hospitals working with physicians and other healthcare staff pretty consistently. So I got to see like, oh, this is like, you know, the daily life of a doctor in this specialty, or, you know, what have you. And that allowed me to be like, oh, well, a doctor spends maybe 2.5 hours after they see patients writing notes. Like, I didn't know that. So that's something to, you know, consider. That's part of their daily job. So once I hit that though, this is in 2017, I was like, I am all in. Here's what I, you know, need to do. And then kind of what Zach mentioned, and Dr. Waskow and Dr. Woolscroft, is basically marrying your professional goals of becoming a physician with your personal growth or passions. So it's being, you know, pretty analytical about how competitive you are as an applicant, your experiences, and how you get into medical school, because ultimately that's how you're going to become a physician, and looking at what are the things you enjoy or like doing and trying to marry those things. I think for me, for example, I really like teaching. I like educating. Part of my job at Epic was teaching about software, but I applied that to volunteering, where I was a high school coach. You may not think that has to do with medicine, but medicine is all about teaching. Residents continuously teach med students, attendings teach residents. It's, you know, a very heavy teaching atmosphere. So for me, it was taking that, you know, that teaching experience, this personal experience, and then applying it to my professional goals. And not to mention, like Zach said, is I loved it. Volunteering, at least from my experience, I have done both. I have tried doing I didn't even put it on my app, but I did a box checking thing for sure. I volunteered in the ED in Madison, Wisconsin when I worked there, and it was miserable. I cleaned some beds. I didn't do very much. And, you know, I didn't really enjoy it. But then I have done other clinical experiences like hospice volunteering where I loved it. And it's so much easier to go and do it and talk about it, write about it, interview about it when you have had that experience and enjoy it. So like Zach said, it's really about finding those personal passions, and they can be a wide variety of things, and applying them to, you know, the professional goal of getting into medicine. And I think for me, there was a humbling period too, where I had talked about how I got a master's degree, and that was mostly because my grades fundamentally weren't good enough. So there is some level of self-reflection and sort of figuring out where you stand continuously along in the process. But yeah, I think, like I said, those two phases were really important for me, and obviously it worked out well, but it was definitely a humbling experience and a lot of self-reflection to get here, so.
You know, Alex, it just struck me when you talk about Epic that, you know, you're very familiar with Epic, and so am I, and so are people who've worked in the healthcare field. But maybe some of the students who are listening to this don't really understand what Epic is. So could you just tell us briefly, because, you know, if somebody sits and thinks, or what are my possibilities for a gap year, maybe something like that wouldn't even come to mind because they don't know what it is.
So I think it is pretty typical, like you probably noticed on the pro slide, there's very standard jobs that pre-medical students get for a gap year. This is an EMT, a scribe, what have you. As I mentioned, I wasn't committed to medicine mentally. So I knew I wanted what my dad calls is a career job, which is, you know, your salary can maintain your lifestyle. You have, you know, adult responsibilities. You have to be there every day at 7, and, you know, you stay there till whenever. And Epic is a healthcare software system that a vast majority of the country uses. It's based in Madison, Wisconsin. I'll actually plug it a little bit. It's a fantastic company. It has about 10,000 employees. They have a Google-like campus, and it's the EMR records. So you are, at least I was a project manager for the hospice application. So long story short is I got to visit and go to a lot of different hospitals in the country and interact with their physician champion, they called them, which is basically picture a Dr. Wasco, but he's invested in healthcare technology of that hospital. And you interact with them and the rest of the staff and basically build the system to fit, the needs of the hospital via the electronic healthcare record. A big part of that, though, is, like I said, this job is very much, it's not direct healthcare experience, but you can apply it to medical school, like I said. So I was exploring what it was like to be a physician, but I also had a career. I could have probably stayed at Epic, and I have friends that are still there to this day that did the same career as me, that were pre-med, and they were like, I like, making money, having a lifestyle, X, Y, and Z. I'm going to stay here. So that was my Epic experience. And it's a little bit different than more of the, I would say, like the standard gap year jobs.
I think that explains it pretty well. Getting back to you, Zach, for a minute. You've spent a lot of time, of course, on research, 3, 4, 5 years now, I think, including your time at school and your time afterwards. What is the value for you? What was the value for you in doing research as a preparation for medical school?
Yeah, so research was definitely a big part of my education at Michigan, and I actually started, I would say, as a freshman, so maybe on the upwards of 8 or 9 years now. But I think the one large thing is it really helps your mental curiosity, and it helps you understand the scientific process. And it's just, I think, really supplements the education in pre-med, but then also once you get into medical school. And one thing that I didn't quite realize at the time was even once in medical school and then ultimately applying to residencies, having a research background is very helpful. And it gives you another thing to talk about, like how you can add value to a university and a program. And I would say, like, the biggest thing is you can make the biggest impact as a physician with your patients. I mean, there's so much, especially like in the Department of Neurosurgery where I was working, from the bench side to the bedside was simultaneously. So, and depending on the type of research you do, there may be nice blends of basic science research, clinical research, and you can mesh them as well. So I think it really was beneficial from a handful of perspectives, but then also you really get to work as part of a team. And I think that's very important in preparation for medicine, because medicine is the ultimate team sport. And working towards a goal as part of a research team is can't be looked over as well.
So what do you say, Zach, to the person who says, I don't think I like research? I don't think I want to do that. I can't see my life as a researcher. What do you say to that person?
I completely understand that perspective. And, some folks, I would say, give it a try. Give it a try. And also, depending on the environment of which you got introduced to research, that could have an impact on that as well. But some people had amazing clinical experiences that were super helpful once they got into medical school. And everyone has their own path, and it doesn't have to be their path if they're set on that. Maybe this isn't the right thing for me.
Okay, well, that makes sense. One question that I have, and I'll address it to Alex, but maybe you can answer it too, Zach, is one of the things that's always important in medical school reviews is clinical contact, the contact that you have with patients. So, Alex, how did you accomplish that? And what you mentioned a little bit about one situation that wasn't too valuable, but what is valuable to get clinical contact? How do you go about it as a gap year student?
So for me specifically, hospice volunteering was my avenue for clinical interaction. I shadowed a few doctors as well, but shadowing, you have more of a passive role, right? So you're with the physician, but you're not directly interacting with the patient, which is kind of the downside, but you obviously get to see the day-to-day. For me, hospice volunteering was my biggest clinical connection with the patient. So luckily for hospice volunteering, end-of-life care, you do, as a volunteer, get to interact with patients almost exclusively. You're usually visiting them in the room or assisting them in some capacity. So I've had multiple, Parkinson's patients, for example, that are declining, where I get to spend 3-4 hours walking with them, talking with them, interacting with them. And I feel like that level of interaction can be really valuable in basically getting that clinical experience. And you get to talk to the nurses, figure out about their case maybe and what they have, their history. So you get a little bit of the science side as well. It's not completely just a personal side. Other avenues, I think, are you can be, a CNA, CNA, or MA, medical assistant. Those are jobs instead of volunteering, but being an MA, you potentially are able to, take vitals, potentially draw blood, and those are ways to interact with patients on a more clinical level as well. So I do think it's really important, though, because once again, as a physician, you're going to be interacting with patients every day, potentially, and you really want to, I guess something that came to mind was I really wanted to know what that felt like, and I felt like those were good experiences that allowed me, to understand how that was, or how that relationship was.
So for either of you, and maybe I'll ask Zach first, how aggressive do you need to be in either a research capacity or shadowing or whatever to get what you consider to be a valuable clinical experience? Is it just going to happen, or do you have to take the initiative?
Yeah, Alex, I think you made some fantastic points there about ways to get clinical experience. And going off your question, Dr. Wasco, yeah, I think it's always in the best interest of the student to take the initiative and seek out opportunities, whether it be serving in a volunteer role at the hospital, or sometimes those conversations can happen maybe in the research arena with your principal investigator. I know I had the opportunity to go into the clinic with them. Sometimes we would go into the operating room to collect patient samples. And then also sometimes we would have the opportunity to consent patients to take part of the research. So I think there is opportunities. And the more transparent you are with the folks that you're working with like your desires and your goals and in what ways you want to develop, I think there can be opportunities to have opportunities to interact in the clinic.
And I guess I can add a little bit too. I think it is really important. We've kind of harped on this, but if you do not enjoy the experience, you've taken time to set it up, you've met with someone, you're going in for your first day and you're miserable. I think one of my biggest pieces of advice would be just don't stop doing it and go experience something else. I can't stress enough how challenging it can be to juggle, volunteering, a job, X, Y, and Z. And if you do not enjoy the experience, you should, reflect on why you're not enjoying this healthcare experience, because that might be some insight into whether you want to be a physician. And 2, what are the other opportunities that I might enjoy more? Zach's clearly very passionate about research. I have done a little bit, but don't share that same level of passion. So for me, I know I might give a certain research project a try, but I'm definitely not head over heels for that, for example. So I seek out different opportunities. So.
Good points.
And I think one of the important things is that whether it's research or clinical experiences, there is a tremendous variety of options out there. Too frequently, individuals think, well, clinical experience is clinical experience. No, it isn't. Hospice is very different than the emergency room, than a primary care clinic, than dermatology, etc. Bench research is very different than health services research, than clinical studies. etc. And so just because one thing isn't appealing, don't write off all of research or all of clinical, because I can almost guarantee that there'll be something out there that you'll find very interesting and engaging.
So we talked earlier about the different kind of academic programs that maybe you might want to take if you're pursuing either a master's degree or just maybe a certificate or just some additional studies. What kind of fields should interest a person going into a gap year to broaden their academic horizons for both of you?
Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, you can take it first if you'd like, Alex, or maybe just repeat the question one more time, Dr. Wasco.
Oh yeah, I mean, for those people who, like Alex actually took a master's program, and
Okay.
you said that you actually took a few courses. How did you decide? What courses did you decide to take? And what do you think was helpful going into medical school?
Oh, great. Yeah, I could start with that. For me personally, I took a microbiology graduate coursework, a physiology coursework, an anatomy coursework. And I would say I think the physiology was the most helpful, the most thought-provoking. And as I mentioned earlier, having that foundation of knowledge in physiology, I think is super helpful for medical school. And I decided to do that just to further be prepared. And I felt like I had the time to do it in addition to working full-time as a researcher. And, my PI supported it as he knew it supported my long-term goals. So it worked out personally for me because I was able to still earn an income, which was like really important for me. And I considered a formal, master's program, but I just knew with like the costs associated with it, it maybe just made sense to just continue to work. And I think it kind of led to the same outcome. And I was able to, demonstrate, the ability to be successful in the academic coursework. And, it came up in interviews and it was very positively received. So that's how it was my personal story, which may be, very unique. Everyone has their own path for sure.
And I'll go off that so I would say my motivations were completely different than Zach's, as he clearly was driven by his personal, like he wanted to better himself and prepare himself for medical school. I had more of I had to do this logistically. That doesn't mean I wasn't passionate about doing these things, but I got a master's degree in physiology here at Michigan. I think the program is fantastic. But a big reason behind that is, as I mentioned earlier, my grades were not competitive enough. And that was just the honest truth. I think as student athletes, I don't want to say I was arrogant per se, but I think there's this habit of maybe thinking your athletic performance and time is going to outweigh your grades. And while it will give you some buffer, it didn't for me, which I think was crucial in me not getting in the first time. I'll be honest and say I had, before I got my master's degree, I had a 3.28 GPA and a 3.3 science GPA. And if you use, there's resources out there. One of them is called the MSAR. I'd highly recommend it. It breaks down these percentiles for your GPA that you can find. And you can, I just looked at it. And the second time around, I realized I'm falling in the, the 5th, the 10th percentile for almost every single school in the country. And I feel like it kind of hit me that, hey, I need to prove that I am a good academic, investment per se, or I have the academic capability to succeed at these schools. So I got the master's degree to not only do that, but then it also, obviously, I chose physiology because I wanted to prove that I was capable in the science realm. I wanted, I took anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, immunology, and based on what Zach says, I'm hoping it's a really good, standard for when I actually matriculate. But I also think it obviously proved to academic, these committees, admissions committees, that, hey, Alex can actually handle the coursework in medical school. So I think it's important to evaluate, once again, where you stand academically to then make a decision whether you want to do academic pursuits or personal, or, as I said, professional growth in this sense.
One of the things that is important when reviewers look at applications is what we call trending. You know, some people will start undergraduate school, and because of the distractions, maybe they're far away from home, independent for the first time in their life, more so than usual, and they don't really satisfy their academic curiosity or their academic ability in their first year, maybe year and a half. But then they learn how to learn, and they develop better study habits. They do better in school. And so when we look at GPAs in our application reviews in the medical schools, we look at trending. And Alex is a good example of that. You know, he finished with a 3, nearly 3.3 average thereabouts, but he felt he was better than that. And so he took a master's program to convince people who were reviewing that he has the academic ability to make it through medical school. And make no doubt about it, the deans of admission and the admissions committees, one of the big parts of their decision is this person going to be able to make the rigors of a medical school education? So one of our current student athletes representing athletes in medicine, Carolyn McGee, has put together some questions to ask yourself. So you want to pick up on that?
Sure. So I kind of tried to put myself into into the shoes of someone applying to medical school or thinking about taking a gap year, and kind of what I would think. So the first one is, why do I want to take a gap year? So like, what would be my purpose for doing so? What would I get involved in, and would it be considered a relevant activity? Dr. Wasco mentioned, you know, will it help my resume? Will it help me look like a more competitive candidate? And is it something that will help me in the future beyond medical school? Like, would I still be doing it even if I was or wasn't going to medical school? And the next one is, what am I looking to learn and experience during a gap year? So that kind of goes with the second question, just, you know, what am I hoping to gain, whether it's personal growth or a better sense of, okay, how is this type of research done, or how does this one area of in a hospital function, and you know, how do you interact with patients, just kind of getting that whole clinical experience like we touched upon. The fourth one, how will a gap year help me with my medical school application and future career? I kind of think it's important to think about not only how will it help me for medical school, but also how will it help me for my job in the future? Like, what can I bring from this gap year to my career and to make me a better physician? You know, and how can I help patients from my gap year? And then the last one, I kind of thought, since there were more pros than cons, like just listed, sometimes they can mean more or less to us. So I underlined the for me part because it's very easy to think about, okay, well, my friend is doing this, you know, a bunch of people in my grade are going straight to medical school, and like I'm not, or I'm just not thinking that I really want to do that. So you kind of have to think for yourself, do the pros of taking a gap year significantly outweigh the cons? Like, am I seeing a lot more positive than negative? And that kind of is why the first question is, why do I want to take a gap year? Not focusing on anyone else, just yourself. Like, why do I want to do this? Will this really benefit me in the future? So I kind of just thought those were some questions just off the bat to ask yourself.
I think it summarizes it perfectly for what we're doing, because there is no such thing as the standard gap year. It has to be what's right for you. So in our final couple minutes, I just want to thank both Zach and Alex for what I consider to be very enlightening presentation. And I know I learned a lot. Any final comments from you, Dr. Williscroft?
I too want to add my thanks, and I think there are some really cogent points that Carolyn made also. Certainly, Alex pointed out that as physicians, we teach all the time. We teach students, we teach patients. As a resident, you teach students, etc. And he recognizes that the work he did will be directly relevant throughout his career. Similarly with Zach, in a much more standard way, recognizing that the research gives him an incredible background. And so Carolyn's point there about how will this make a difference going forward is really a very important thing to reflect on as you think about your gap year. And our two student athletes have just really enriched this conversation. And I too, once again, want to just thank them for their participation. And also want to say, go blue, even though not all of you will be in a blue university this fall.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Can we turn you back to our host here now, the director of the Career Center, Mo Washington? Any final comments, Mo?
Well, this was absolutely informative, amazing, and I'm so excited to have these two young professionals joining us today. Great information that you're sharing, and you both are going to go forth and do some amazing things, you know. So I look forward to that. Never know, maybe a customer, right, someday, right? But you know, the challenges that you all have, especially Alex, listening to your story, your story is not, it's so common, right? And student athletes don't know what to do next. And so I'm glad you had the fortitude and the energy and the tenacity to go and just push forward, right? Zach, definitely all-star, wonderful, in your path. And so, we're just fortunate to have you here, today. And I know the students who will be paying attention to this, you're going to answer a lot of those questions. The questions that Caroline put up, definitely those are questions you said for you, but I'm sure tons of people would want to ask the same questions. And so, we're just fortunate enough to have a forum like this where we can answer those questions, right? So on the slide you see there is our upcoming webinar series. The next is becoming a physician assistant. And then we're going to go to world of dentistry, career in sports medicine, life as a medical student, nursing, and physical therapy. And so great topics. And this is possible because of our leadership in our Doctors In program, Dr. Wasco, Dr. Williscroft. I'm just phenomenal professionals, in their own right in the profession. Tons and tons of knowledge. So again, we want to thank them for being here, and our students are better because of it, because we have them. And then Caroline, her as a student athlete, her leadership, leading our athletes in medicine. My team is on here. Julie and Cody is on here, and this doesn't happen again without a great team, great staff. So we're looking forward to it. So again, thanks for all for joining us today. Enjoy the weather. Definitely be safe out there. At least until these two gentlemen here become new doctors, right? Definitely be safe, right? And again, as the doctor said, if you got to go, go blue.